Okay, welcome back.
Welcome back to another episode.
Another episode of Sober, Shaken, and Stirred.
Yes.
We're going to start this one off with just a bit of a disclaimer. Some heavy topics today. Some trigger warnings.
Yeah.
We'll note this in the description as well, but we are going to talk about sexual assault.
Yes. So if that's a no-go for you,
then skip it.
You can come back and visit us next episode.
Yes, and just skip it. But it does tie in a lot to my addiction.
Mm-hmm.
So
important to note.
Yeah. With that being said, I went back and forth a lot actually before I ever brought up to you that I wanted to openly discuss this part of my life on our podcast.
Yes.
Because I don't talk about this part of my life with almost anybody. But I think it is extremely important, and it is a big reason as to why I drank so much at certain points in my life.
Mm-hmm.
That to not talk about the sexual assault I've gone through in my life wouldn't really give a full picture of why my addiction was so intense in certain stages.
So early on in life, too.
So early on.
Yeah.
So to start us out, I was sexually abused for years when I was a child by two family members.
Yes.
Who will remain nameless because I would not like to state that. And I didn't even, so I was 8 when it started, and it went on for a few years, and then it ended. It was so young that I truly didn't begin to process what had happened or even acknowledge it, because, and I now know, like, you know, when you're a child, then you don't understand things, like you just like don't deal with them. I have since.
Well, you didn't know that it was something that had to be dealt with.
I didn't know it was something
as a kid.
Exactly. Yeah. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't understand the extent of everything.
Yeah.
So it happened, and then I just went on with life. And it was actually just like a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really uncomfortable going certain places and being with certain people alone because of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't tell anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And there was actually a time, I want to say like a year and a half into it happening, that I was driving in the car with my dad, and I remember this so vividly that he asked me if I was being sexually abused by the person one. Yeah. Person one of the people. And apparently my mom had gone to him and said that she was concerned and there was something wrong, and she thought it was because I was being sexually abused. And I said no, but I remember saying it in a way so desperately that I wanted him to ask me another question.
Yes.
Because I didn't want to talk about it, but I knew I needed to talk about it.
Okay.
And that was also like the first time in my brain that it really was like, no, this is as awful as it makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And we're driving in the car, and I remember looking out my passenger window. It was just me and him in the car, and I just said no.
Do you think that like the thought of getting people in trouble, or like the guilt of saying yes, was part of the reason why you said no? Or did like...
I honestly don't know.
Okay.
But I knew maybe it was the guilt. Okay. Maybe it was that I just genuinely, like, it made me so uncomfortable to think about or talk about. So I just tried not to ever.
Okay.
And I hadn't ever talked about it. Like, I didn't speak about it for years, even like after that point. But I remember saying no and just staring out the window and thinking back to a time where he had asked me a different question about something completely differently.
Your dad?
My dad had asked me a different question about something completely differently. And I said no and stopped talking. And he said, well, I know you're not telling me the truth, right? Like this different thing.
Oh, okay.
And it's because how I responded to him and just stopped talking, because I was a really chatty kid and I was like always talking. And that was just like a running joke in all of my family all the time, is I never stopped talking. And I remember saying no and just not saying anything else to him in the incident that he had asked me in the car if I was being sexually abused, and thinking that, like, this is how he asks you more. Like, if you say it like this, he's going to ask again.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, as a kid, I knew he was going to ask me again, and he never did. And he said, okay, then. And then he just kept driving. So for my entire life, I've always wondered what made my mom think that.
I'm curious as to what made your dad, I don't know, like, it seems like it was asking out of necessity and not out of wanting to actually know the answer.
Yeah, almost like my mom and I never had very in-depth conversations about things. Like, my mom never talked to me about other, like, my period or anything like that, about being like a woman. Like, my dad always had those conversations, and they were separated most of my life. So my mom and I just didn't have that type of dialogue. So I do think she wanted to ask, but she just couldn't for some reason.
Interesting.
And my dad and I did. Like, my dad took me to buy pads my first time I ever bought them, and took me to buy my first bra the first time I ever. So him and I had more of that relationship, and he had no issue having intimate conversations with his children.
Okay.
So maybe that was it. And to this day, like, to me not talking to my mother anymore, her and I never had a sex talk ever. About anything, about like a regular sex talk you have with your teenage child, right? My dad had those talks with me. So my mom and I just didn't have that type of rapport. So I don't know if that is just because she didn't know how to talk about it to children.
I think it's so weird that you just said didn't have that type of rapport. To me, like, a mom talking to her daughter about stuff like that isn't about rapport. It's about teaching your child what's safe. And
I understand that, but my mom didn't have that in any regard in my life.
Yeah, I guess.
So that's, looking back on my life now, I do know that we just never had any conversations ever about sexual abuse, about sex in general, about making sure you're safe, about having a period as a woman. Like, her being the woman figure in my life, we never had a conversation about that.
That's wild.
Yeah. So regardless, him and I had many conversations through my life about many different things, but in that moment, it very much felt strained, and that he was being forced to ask me, but by who? My mom. So I did say no, was never asked about it again.
Okay.
It did stop when I was about 10 or 11. I don't remember exactly when, but it went on for years. And then, so 6th grade, I turned 11.
Okay.
And then I didn't really start to truly process it probably till 8th grade freshman year. And that's the first time I told somebody about it, that it had happened. And I honestly don't even remember the conversation. I just know that's around the time that I had told my best friend or best friends at the time, right? That those things had happened to me, and that I was really uncomfortable. And it all started in the time that, like, kids start having sex and kissing and making out and being very publicly sexual beings, right? Like, you're 13, 14 years old and everyone has a boyfriend or a girlfriend and they're just making out. And I was not about it. And it's not that, like, there was a part of me that obviously, like, was a teenager and wanted to make out with people and kiss people, but I didn't have my first kiss until I was 15, and I was under the influence when that happened. Because I was not comfortable in that section of life at all.
Fair. Makes sense.
So then, because my first interactions of kissing people or making out with people were under the influence, and that gave me the ability to be able to do it, both, like, the courage, right, to do things like that, and also it made me not think about my trauma.
Well, yeah, it just allowed you to shove
everything down.
Emotions down if you're intoxicated.
Exactly. So I was pushing down a lot, as we've talked about, like, everything going on with my parents and their drug use and all of the stuff, but also all of my personal things. So it really was alcohol, and at the time I was doing ecstasy in high school. was my escape from reality. And I could be a person that didn't care so much about all of the trauma in my life and all of the things I was feeling about my own trauma. And so I just continued down that path. Right? Like, oh, a couple of drinks makes you feel okay, or a couple of drinks makes your, like, lowers your anxiety around making out with people. Like, even making out with people. I was a virgin till I was 19 also. So I was, like, really not having sex.
Yeah.
I didn't have sex at all in high school. It was after I graduated. And it was so much because I was just so genuinely afraid. Not that the opportunity did not come up. It had a few times, and I would just get up and walk out.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually remember very specifically that I was talking to a girl in high school, and we were, like, hooking up.
You should have just started telling people that you were saving yourself till marriage.
I wasn't religious.
Fair.
I wasn't religious, so it wouldn't have worked. But I remember, like, I was hooking up with someone that I was dating. We were at this house party, and I genuinely stood up and was like, I'm sorry, and just, like, walked out of the room. And it's because I started to have a full-blown panic attack. And then I remember her friend, a guy, coming out and being like, well, she's crying. What just happened? And I was like, I'm just not ready to have sex. And he's like, you've never had sex? And I was like, no.
Okay, peer pressure. Okay.
Well, I was 16 or 17 at that point.
Yeah.
And of this incident. So it would just, like, continued on in my life. And I really just couldn't get past it. But I kept thinking, like, the more you drink, the more you'll just, like, be able to. Like, you could just do it. You could just have sex.
Mm-hmm.
My closest friends at the time did know that but I didn't talk about it. I, like, told them, and I was like, whew, you told them, it's done, you never have to talk about it again. So I wasn't just going around and being like, I'm uncomfortable with sexual encounters with people because I was
X,
molested.
Y, and Z.
Yeah. Because I was molested for years.
Oh.
So it wasn't like I was processing it at all. It was just one of those things. And I think as a kid, or at least myself as a kid, as a teenager, was like, if you tell one person, then you're not carrying all of the weight and you've done your job. Like, you've shared the information.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I mean, I can see how that would make sense to a teenager.
It doesn't make sense in the real world.
Yeah.
But
I can understand that.
It made sense. So I had shared it, but I wasn't planning on ever telling my parents. I wasn't planning on ever telling a true adult that could get me help. I was just like, I've told them eventually these feelings will go away. Eventually you can drink enough to have sex with somebody, I guess. Which did happen.
Yeah.
I wasn't blacked out when I had sex for the first time, but I was under the influence, and I picked a guy, actually, even though I knew I was gay. That was a very, very close friend of mine that I really trusted. And even he was like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this?
Oh.
And he knew too. And I was like, yeah, I want to do this. It was awful because I was very uncomfortable and didn't want to do it. And I forced myself.
Well, first time, also intoxicated, also
with a man. Not great.
Just
everything
stacked against you.
Yeah, I just wanted to get it over with. Right at the point that I was 19 and I was drinking just to be able to make out with people because I was so wildly uncomfortable. And it wasn't like I used to kiss everybody. And it was kind of my way of showing that I wasn't uncomfortable. And also I was one of, like, the 3 lesbians in my town. So all the girls were just like, oh my God, you like girls. Can I kiss you?
You're the token gay.
I was the token gay. Yeah. And so I was like, yeah, we can make out. Sure, I don't care. And I was trying to force myself to be more comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But I really wasn't. So I then, with a very nice friend I had in high school, lost my virginity, drunk. I remember getting up and leaving where we were and walking over to my other friend and being like, I gotta get drunk. Like, and then I blacked out that night because I was like, I have to drink to deal with all of these emotions I'm now having because I'm so wildly uncomfortable that I've done this.
Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't great.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I was dealing with it. in the moment.
Oh, okay.
Because, you know, as a teenager, you just convince yourself of things that aren't true.
Yeah.
And mind you, one of the people who was involved in molesting me at a younger age, I luckily no longer had to deal with. They were distantly related to me and was no longer in my regular life. One of them I still saw. So I didn't know how to process any of that and just was uncomfortable a lot of the time in my life. And then, you know, I was a high school alcoholic who just drank to deal with all of my things. So it was just like another thing that I wasn't dealing with. It was just like, okay, you're the girl with no power who has addict parents and can't eat food at home because you have no food and you were like molested as a child.
It also makes me think about like your gap year. If you would have left and gotten out sooner, you could have probably started to deal with,
heal
a bit quicker before you were like in the trenches, you know? But
I was pretty in the trenches.
Yes.
But then I did take a gap year and I spent, as stated before, that entire time drinking because I was just trying to not feel anything ever. And I moved away to college, and the summer between my first year and my second year. So we knew each other, but it was the summer that you and I actually started hanging out and being friends, but at the beginning of the summer. So my first year goes by, and I'm like living college life, doing college things. Freshman year of college ends, and I moved in. God, no, that couldn't have been it. I had to be my second semester of my college year. It's very foggy.
Well, understandably, yeah.
But I was sexually assaulted
in
college, and I don't remember anything. I remember being at so I had a friend who lived near actually one of our coworkers. They live like a 5-minute walk away. And so we went to the coworker's place to drink. And at this time, my friends and him had started to become friends. And so I was like, I'm going to go. I'm tired. I'm going to leave. I don't know. I remember wanting to leave. I don't remember leaving.
Okay.
And then I remember coming to in a very strange place, like the basement of an apartment building.
Okay.
With a man.
In a basement?
Yeah.
Okay, creepy.
Yeah. Not clothed. And rightfully freaking out.
Yeah.
And then I don't remember anything after that either. So I was very intoxicated. And then I remember showing back up to my friend's place. The time that elapsed, I have no idea, because I showed back up and everyone was at the friend's place. And I remember just like knocking on the door to try and get in. And they're like, where have you been? And then I don't remember anything until the police showing up. And then I remember being in a police car, going to the hospital, and then we did a rape kit.
Yeah.
And one friend was allowed to come with me. And so we did that. And then immediately we left. And I looked at this friend and said, the only way that I'm going to make it through this is if we drink. Which had clearly
it worked super well for you before.
So much in my life.
Yeah.
But I remember looking at him and telling him that I wanted to kill myself. Because how had this happened to me again as an adult?
Yeah.
And so we went to his apartment, and I called out of work, actually. We had worked together. We knew each other.
I remember.
And I called their boss, and I don't even know what I said because I was drunk. But I do think I told her that I had gone to the hospital and I needed the day off. And she was like, yeah, absolutely, whatever you need. And I called out and then just like cried and drank. And then really contemplated killing myself because I just couldn't handle that again. So that wasn't a great time in my life. It did make me want to not drink as much because drinking had got me in this situation. Because, and I don't know how to say this without saying like I'm blaming myself, because if I wasn't blackout drunk, this probably wouldn't have happened.
Right.
That doesn't excuse it happening, and that doesn't excuse this man who I couldn't pull out of a crowd. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I genuinely don't remember what happened. I do know that there was some type of non-consensual sex because the doctor told me that.
Yeah.
And then the rest of that summer prior to us, I would say it was a few weeks until you and I really got close and started becoming friends. I was very hesitant to drink more than just like drinking a couple of drinks with friends.
Mm-hmm.
One, because I was afraid something else was going to happen. And two, I knew that I wanted to drink until I no longer lived.
Right. You were starting to notice that you had a problem.
That I had an alcohol problem. And I remember actually, this whole incident happens and a day or two go by and I go back to my place where I'm living and am talking to two friends, the one that was with me and someone else. And I remember telling them like, this is the point that I like would to kill myself. Right. And us having this conversation and them talking me off of a ledge.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know. It was just like something that I didn't deal with or talk about. Like it happened in such this small bubble that I just put it back in the bubble.
Yeah.
Like with everything else that had happened in my childhood. I was like, okay, well, instead of going and getting any type of help, instead of like trying to then process everything that happened in my childhood, I just thought, okay, well, it's happened and you're never going to talk about it again. And then that's it. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
We became friends.
Yes.
Do you remember?
And shortly after that,
Uh-huh.
I was assaulted.
Yeah.
In San Francisco. And I actually think that's part of the reason why we got so close is because you did come up to me and you said, this just happened to me. Let me help you. And mine was not near, like, anywhere near what yours was, but it is still absolutely, like, it's heartbreaking. So I think that is part of why we started.
So I don't know that we said this last season, but the first time we actually hung out was because you had been assaulted and then something was happening outside and I was asked to make sure you got home safe.
Yeah.
Because it was not too long after you were assaulted on your way to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was supposed to just like walk you downstairs and make sure you got into a cab.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up walking you all the way home. And that was like the beginning of us being friends and not coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
So
women got to look out for other women.
Yeah, they do.
But yes, so I do remember that. And I obviously didn't take the phone call of you calling out, but I was at work that day.
Mm-hmm.
So I do remember when it happened. I can't remember like what year, like you were saying, because it's just far back in the timeline.
It's so crazy because like I can think of it in the year month like frame it is. And I know it was my second semester of college. It couldn't have been summer yet.
Yeah.
Because of where I was staying.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't. Like it's all locked away.
Yeah.
And I locked it away so deeply that I honestly don't want to unlock it. Like, this is not a thing I need to unlock. I was told what was happened to me medically, and that is all that I need to know.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so that started our friendship. And I told you very early on, too, when we started dating, everything else that had happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was really uncomfortable in sexual situations. So, like,
yes,
anything at all. Like, being touched. Like, cuddling.
Yeah, not your favorite thing in the world.
No, holding hands. Which is crazy, because if you meet me now, I'm like a physically affectionate person.
You are.
Like, I'm a hugger and we hold hands and like, excuse me, all of this stuff. Take it away. Hold on.
Take it away. Take it away, Kronk. You are a physically affectionate human. Not just with me, but like
in general.
In general.
People.
You are.
And I wasn't, because I was so uncomfortable all of the time. Sorry, that cough made me lose my train of thought. And besides you, so we obviously started dating and we were together, and I was drinking during that time still, but on and off. But besides you, even to this point in my life, right, I have never kissed, made out, done anything with any other person not under the influence.
Yes.
Because I hadn't processed anything. And my gosh, I'm so sorry. I hadn't processed anything that happened, and I was so uncomfortable. And I shared with you when we were dating, but we broke up for a time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was dating other people, I like couldn't do it. I like couldn't go on dates sober. Like the thought of like kissing anyone else was still really uncomfortable to me. And not because it wasn't you, but the thought of kissing anyone that I didn't wholeheartedly trust.
Yeah.
Made me uncomfortable in my own skin. And I couldn't do it. Which, you know, all like just led back to all of the trauma and all of the things I had gone through. But at a time, we were actually broken up still when this happened. My mother came to visit, my birth mom.
Mm-hmm.
I was still in contact with her. And so this was really like the nail in the coffin in our relationship. So when I say that I don't talk to my birth mom anymore, obviously it is due to her addiction. But she was asking me a lot of questions about a lot of things that I couldn't give answers to without telling her I'd been sexually assaulted for a lot of years in my childhood. And she was staying in my apartment because she had called me and told me that she was ready to get sober. We already had a strained relationship. I wasn't talking to her all that often. But she was like, I'm going to come there and I'm going to get sober. And I was like, yeah, sure. I talked to my roommate at the time and I was like, hey, she's going to come stay with us for a few days where we get her into a program. She'll stay in my room. She won't be in your hair, you know. She's like, yeah, sure. She was there for all of 2 days. And in that time, she kept bringing up my childhood. And so like she knew. That's the crazy thing. Is like she's the one who prompted my father to ask when I was a kid.
Well, we're speculating, but
no, I knew.
Okay.
He told me
that it was your mom.
Was concerned.
Okay.
So she knew, and that's so crazy to me. Like moms just know things. Like there is a mother's intuition, and I fully believe in that. But I'm like, where the fuck was this mother intuition about yourself? About the drug using, right?
Well, that's self-reflection.
Can't do that.
Not mother's intuition.
No, because she can't do anything wrong.
Well,
sorry. But yes, my mom asked me, and finally I was like, I was assaulted for years as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't handle that well.
No, she handled it really terribly, actually. That was a kind way for you to put it, but yeah, I would say.
Well, I don't expect any mother who hears that their child was assaulted for not once, not twice, but for years. On a weekly basis.
Like
guys.
A regular schedule.
This wasn't like 2 or 3 times. Not that any number of times is appropriate for a child to ever be hurt in this way, but on a weekly basis for years.
Yeah.
This happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I told her. She flipped out, and I gave her time and her moment, and she collected herself. And among many things that I don't agree with that she said to me, she stated, "Is this why you're gay?" Which is, it's not. I knew I was gay before then. I just hadn't told anyone. And asked, I wonder what happened to them for them to do this to you.
Okay.
And then she told me she couldn't possibly get sober after learning this information.
Couldn't possibly
get
Wonderful
sober.
48 hours of an attempt.
after learning this information. And I was like, well, I can't.
You know what I think's gross?
What?
I mean, all of this is gross, but what's extra gross is that she then turned you telling her about it around on you and said, I can't get sober now because you've told me this information.
Well, that's not how I heard it, but I
know that is like actually like like that is what she was saying.
But she wasn't like, because you told me this. She was like, because I've learned this, there's no way I can possibly not do drugs to deal with it. And the one thing,
how did she learn this? Because you told her.
I know. Listen. I get it. I'm not on her side. Like I said, this arguably was one of the worst days of my life, telling my birth mom. So I get it. But she didn't look at me and say, because you've now told me this information. And I know that that's how you hear it. But me being an addict.
Yes.
I know that her brain said what she had said to me, which is, now that I know this information, I can use it as a crutch to continue to do drugs. This is a justifiable reason, learning that my daughter was abused for years without my knowledge is a reason
except
that
for
I can justify.
She had the knowledge.
She didn't know. She thought it.
That's why I was saying earlier, we're speculating.
Yeah.
But
yeah, like I said, she's the one who asked my dad, and that's why my dad asked me. Now, so she speculated, and now she was confirmed, which also, I've really tried to think through what her process in her brain could have possibly been. And my birth mom was like a very self-loathing person. I get it from her. But imagine thinking that as your child being 8 or 9 when I was asked, right? 9 maybe. And then when they're 23, them telling you. So that entire time of your life, you just like not knowing. And her looking back and thinking like, I could have stopped it. I could have done something different. We could have got her help as a child. So I know she spiraled. I'm not justifying her doing more drugs. I'm just saying, like, you think through this, and this is why I think both of our perspectives are so important in these conversations, because you think through this logically, and I think through it like an addict, and she is an addict, so her brain works like mine. Not the same way, because I could have never made all the same choices that she had, but her then using it as a crutch to not go into a program, even though that is the whole, like, promised me that was why she was coming there and all of that stuff, went and looked at a few, like, was deciding on which one she was going to go to. And then
couldn't possibly. Not with this information.
No. So she left the next day.
Which I also think is quite bold.
Yeah.
Like, your daughter just told you that she had been getting molested for years. And your response is, simply can't get sober now. Also, toodaloo, I'll be leaving now. What?
Well, she didn't know anyone to buy drugs from San Francisco. And not that she couldn't have found them, but she wasn't going to walk into the Tenderloin and buy drugs when she could just go home and buy drugs from whoever she always bought drugs from.
Astounding.
I mean, I think the opposite of astounding, but yes.
Gobsmacked. Big woof.
Yeah. So, and it's one of that moment. So I have some very visceral moments, and I always have some moments that I don't remember at all, because there's a lot about the time in my life when I was being molested that I just don't remember, because you just like put it all away and you lock it away somewhere deep inside yourself because you don't want to know. But my dad asking me, my mom's reaction, like, I could, if I could draw, I can't, but if I could draw you the whole scene. Like, I know exactly where everything was, like where she stood, everything.
Yeah.
It's like one of the visceral memories that I have. It's also one of the things that still hurts. Like, her reaction still hurts when I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I have talked about the way in which I feel emotions is differently than you. Like, I physically feel in my chest when something emotionally hurts. And you think it more logically. And this is like one of those things that, like, I remember the feeling in the moment that she said those things to me. I also remember her leaving, and that was when I was like, we're done.
Yeah.
We're done. Like, how does your child tell you this? Now, I don't know what a good reaction would have been.
I was thinking through that lens as well. Like, what would I hope to hear?
I hoped to tell her.
Yeah. But like, what would I hope someone's response to be? And I don't think that they're like, I don't know. I don't know what I would want to hear from somebody because there's nothing really that you can say. But ultimately, like, I feel any sort of sense of support coming from her would have done a whole hell of a lot better than what was given.
Yeah. Which was no support.
Zero support. And then just essentially saying, well, this is why you're gay. And whoops, I'm going to be an addict for the rest of my life because you've told me this information. The dots are not connecting for me.
They're not. And it also then, the one thing that my parents did well, let me take that back. The one thing that my parents didn't do awfully in my entire life was handling me being gay.
Yeah.
Was it perfect? No. Did my dad have many questions? Yeah, that I thought were dumb questions. He used to be like, how do you know? I'm like, how do you know you're straight? He's like, you just do. And I'm like, there you go, dude.
There's your sign.
Here's your sign. I didn't wake up one day. Like, I've just always known. I've never liked boys.
Mm-hmm.
We've all known this.
Yes.
There are other people who are related to me who knew before I knew.
Well, your coming out process was also quite seamless because
that's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah, like you didn't have a lot of hardship. Arguably you had none. No hardship when
about
it came
the gay
to
thing.
Yeah, when it came to
I think if there are
your coming out story.
I think if there are any almighty forces to be, they were like, she's taking too many hits. Leave this one. She can't shower in her own home. She has no water. Maybe they should be fine that she's gay.
Yeah.
No, my birth mom was great. I actually was dating a boy that I didn't really want to be dating. He asked me out and I said yes. And we held hands for like one day. And we were in high school. I was like 15. He was gay. I was gay. We both knew. We both knew. But we were like, okay. He didn't want to be gay and I didn't care. So I told my mom I had a boyfriend. And she said, if you're not gay, I think I'm going crazy. And I said, well, I am gay. She said, okay, then why are you dating a boy? And I said, I don't know.
Because it's something to do on the weekends. I don't know.
I said that to her. I said, I don't know. She said, don't do that then.
Yeah.
Don't do that. So my birth mom handled that really well. But then it negated this whole instance where she looked at me and said, is this why you're gay? Negated that.
I feel like I have to like really think on that one for a bit. Because like, are you trying to infer that being gay only happens when there's like a traumatic event that causes someone to be gay? Do you think that being gay is something that is caused? Or do you know what I'm saying?
I know. And that's why I'm saying my birth mom had been so supportive about the gay thing. Then this happened and I was like, well, the one thing you had going for you, you blew that candle right out.
Yeah.
So that really did frustrate me. Yeah, it really frustrated me. I thought she had handled it so well when I was younger. And I don't know. I wish we had statistics because even in that moment, I thought the same thing. Like, do you think people are only gay because they've been sexually abused? Because there's a lot of straight people, both men and women, who've been sexually abused who aren't gay.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of gay people who haven't been sexually abused. And then there's a lot of,
That's why I'm saying, like,
that-
I think I just need some time to unpack that and
that-
figure out
that
that
diagram
thought
is
process. Yeah.
an intense diagram.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly thought about looking up statistics because I knew we were going to get to this point.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter, right? Now, my father never knew, to my knowledge, that this had happened officially
Mm-hmm.
after the random conversation. But what also happened next for my birth mom was, she had kept calling me to talk about it more, and I wasn't answering the phone because I didn't want to talk about it more. You just up and left and are clearly doing drugs.
Well, probably thinks that a phone conversation is easier than an in-person conversation.
Going back to the fact that, of
Yeah.
course, my birth mom left. We had never had any intimate conversation ever about anything regarding this, right? So, but she did go home and she shared that information with other people in my family. Not my father, but other people in my family without my...
You're okay.
My
Your
okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, didn't ask me. Just shared it with almost anyone who would listen. And that made me even more uncomfortable because not your story to share.
Mm-hmm.
We're here now, and I would say I can count on two hands how many people I've personally told.
Yeah.
And in this depth, 3 people. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very personal thing for people to share when and how they're ready. And so that also was like the whole situation. It wasn't just her reaction. It wasn't her.
So inappropriate.
Yeah, it wasn't her then doing drugs again after she promised me for the umpteenth time she wouldn't, and then putting that burden on this situation. It was also how she handled it afterwards in so many regards. And then when I stopped answering all of her calls and messages, remember she started sending me letters,
Mm-hmm.
writing out a whole thing about how dare I tell her this and then stop talking to her. And that's when like the blame game really started. And obviously she was so removed from reality, but I already hated myself so much for every sexual abuse that had ever happened to me.
Yeah.
I, for years, never hated the people who had done it, and I'd only hated myself. And you even knew that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we had talked about it once, and I was like, I mean, whatever about them. Like, it was my fault in my mind, all of them, which for it to be an 8-year-old's fault is insane and wild, and just how we're programmed to believe.
Mm-hmm.
So after I told my birth mom, that is when I really was trying to date, as you said, and that didn't go well. So just like more of a reason to really just like pump booze into my system. It's crazy how hypocritical I was as an addict, because my birth mom looked at me and used a thing that I gave her as a crutch to do drugs, and I said, that's disgusting. And then I turned around and used the situation with my birth mom to drink more as a crutch.
Yes.
So I do understand being removed from that situation, that I was a hypocrite.
Mm-hmm.
But in the moment, I was like, how dare you? I'm going to go drink.
Yeah.
This was a bad situation. This made me have feelings. I don't really do that. I don't really have feelings. I just drink about them.
Yeah.
So then I spiraled a lot more intensely into the continued addiction of my life. Now, before I move on, any other thoughts, questions about what I've said before? No? Okay.
No.
So all of that to kind of close the circle on my drinking and give more context to it. Not to say that I would have used anything. Like, I am an addict.
Yeah.
I would have used anything to drink. I would have found any crutch in the world to do so. But I didn't go to therapy for my sexual abuse until years after I got sober.
Yeah.
So when getting sober, and that's a thing that I still think is very different than a traditional path, is you are supposed to deal with a lot of your stuff so you can stay sober, be honest. And I was honest with myself that I knew if I tried to get sober and deal with my sexual assault that I was never going to get sober. I couldn't do them both at the same time. And I was unwilling to go to therapy at all. And talk about my sexual assault. And that doesn't mean I didn't go to therapy. I went to therapy while I was drinking.
Yeah.
I just like talked about a bunch of other stuff and never talked about it. And then I got sober. And what, 3 years into sobriety, I went to therapy and talked about it. At least 2 years.
Yeah, I think like 3 years in.
Yeah. So we would say I'm 6+ years now, but from season 1, like half the way into my sobriety is when I finally was in a place where I could deal with this and work through it. And I don't know that I'll ever be a fully healed individual who, I don't even know what that looks like for someone who has sexual trauma.
Yeah.
Because I just don't know how you heal from that. But I am less triggered. I have worked through a lot of the loathing I had for myself. I don't hate myself because of it. I do hate the others, which I think isn't as, it's not healthy, but at least we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
And a lot of me deciding to go to therapy about this is we have a good friend who had gone through a similar situation as a child.
Had a similar life event, yeah.
Yeah, had a very similar life event to me. And they ended up, how do I say this?
They ended up taking legal action eventually.
There you go.
And they were going, yeah.
They ended up taking legal action. So it was very prevalent in our friend group.
Yeah.
And I was very removed.
Well, you had to be.
Yes. And we explained it to them and they fully understood, right? And like her and I had conversations on the side where I was open and honest with her, where I was like, I love you. I support you. I will be here in whatever capacity I can. My capacity is way less because I can't.
Yeah.
And them obviously also being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, was very understanding with that. But there was a long time that I was really removed from the friend group because it made me want to drink so heavily.
Yeah.
And when we talk about triggers and boundaries, this is one of those things where I knew if I didn't put such an intense boundary, and you and I had to talk about it a lot because you were very there for them and you were very supportive for them. And I wanted you to be able to do that with no hesitation. It's hard to rate, like, oh, when I struggled the hardest, but this was probably one of the hardest times in my sobriety. That, right? Like, not this moment, but the moment where they were going through all of their legal battles.
Well, because it just brings everything back up.
Yes. And then I knew, too, that if I didn't go to therapy and I didn't get some type of help, I would have drank.
Yeah.
There was no other option. It was like actually facing everything because I was convinced prior to then that I could be sober for the rest of my life, never talk about it. So I think it all comes out in time for yourself when you are getting sober. I don't believe that you have to deal with everything right off the back because that makes sobriety so unobtainable. If it's like, oh, to be sober and to be successful in your first month, you're going to have to deal with every trauma you've ever had in your entire life. No one would ever get sober.
Yeah.
So I did wait a few years and then was reluctantly pushed by the universe to deal with it. But it is an ever-evolving part of my life because I would say I did get in a good place where I had talked to a therapist about it, but we didn't even know that I was going to talk about it on the podcast ever. We didn't know that I was going to share it with the world.
I think that, yeah, any sort of sexual assault, sexual trauma is such an incredibly personal thing. And I think that your addiction was more than just you dealing with that trauma. So I didn't think it necessarily like had to be spoken about. I think that you are over and above courageous and brave to bring it up on such like a scale. So even the fact that you can talk about it this openly shows like just insane amounts of growth in the first place. So, I mean, self-loathing be gone, but also just like give yourself like a massive hug and a massive pat on the back because I think that's insane. But yeah,
Yeah. You got some, it's, when you're younger, and I don't want to say that we were all suicidal, but I think a lot of us went through times for different reasons.
Yeah.
And when you're like really in the thick of it and you think like the only way out is to die, and that like came up at different points in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when the thing happened in college and I really wanted to be dead, I wasn't going to like go and kill myself. I was just going to like drink until something bad happened to me that caused me to die. That was like the end goal in my brain. Like alcohol was my way out. You like look back now and people always tell you like, oh, it'll get better. Like you'll get to a point. And I think so why I never believed that is because I knew I was always going to carry this weight. And I will always have this weight, right? Like I'll always have the weight of all of the trauma that I went through as a child. But I carry it differently now.
Yeah.
And it's not, if I could wish it away, I would never have been sexually abused, right? Like if that's anything that I could take away, it would be that one first off my list. Like I would stay an addict and get rid of that one first, and that's saying something because I wish every day that I wasn't an addict.
Yeah.
But I also am now here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know how to say this properly in a way that makes sense, but like it is still with me every day, but it's no longer holding me back from being who I want to be.
Yeah.
Right? Like I won't allow it to be like, I made a lot of choices in my drinking that I'm still working through not letting hold me back because those were decisions that I made. Like I decided to drink and drink and drink days on end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those were my choices. But these things happening to me, especially as a child, even the one as an adult, none of those happened to me because of me. Other people made those choices. Yeah. Other people did those things to me. So it's not my weight to carry. I will always have to carry it, just like any other person who has ever been sexually assaulted will always have to carry that with them.
Yeah.
But it's just a part of me, and it's not like... And I think that's why I'm at the point of where I am willing to share it, because I don't want to be ashamed of it anymore. In the same regard that I want to do the podcast because I don't want to be ashamed of being an addict anymore. Like I am an addict, but I'm also all of these great things. Mm-hmm. I was sexually abused multiple times in my life, but that's not who I am. It's just a thing that happened to me.
Yeah.
So if you did stay through this episode and listen, because I know it's a heavy topic, and if it is triggering for you, I apologize. But if it is triggering for you, maybe this is the moment that you find a way to work through it just a little bit so it's less triggering for you.
Yeah.
In the way that I'm going to just say one more story is we were at dinner with someone who's actually quite a bit older than us, and she had said she was sexually abused in her life. Mm-hmm. And then I just said I was too in the moment. And I almost was like, was that me? Did I say that? Because who said that? And it was so instinctual that I was like, I have been too. 3 years prior to that moment, and this was within the last year, right?
Yeah.
3 years prior, before I went to therapy, before I like started to work through all these things, I would have kept my mouth shut and I would have panicked on the inside.
Yeah.
But, growth. More growth to go, but we've done some. Yeah. Yeah. I have so much more to say, but...
Like, do you feel good now?
I feel good talking about this. What I also want to say is just thank you to you. One, not just for like allowing me to have this conversation so openly and supporting it, but when I met you all those many moons ago, right? Mm-hmm. And I first said this to you. It's one, because I already felt so comfortable and supported with you, but I've never told you any of my trauma, this included, and felt judged. And I needed that.
Yeah.
So, thank you. And I love you.
Love you most.
Yeah. That's a wrap.
Wrap it.